My husband looked at my mother across the dinner table and said, "Why did you invite the old hag again?" My mother had been staying with us for 2 weeks. She had just had knee surgery and couldn't take care of herself alone. I was her only child. My father had passed away 3 years ago. There was no one else to help her recover. I had asked my husband Leonard before she arrived if it was okay. He said fine. He said no problem. He said whatever you need. He said all of that with a smile on his face like a good husband who supported his wife. Then my mother actually arrived and Leonard's smile disappeared. He complained about everything. He complained that she used too much hot water. He complained that she watched television too loud. He complained that she took too long in the bathroom. He complained that her medication bottles cluttered the counter. He complained that she talked too much during dinner. He complained about her breathing once. I told him she had just had surgery and needed patience. He said he was being patient. He said I didn't appreciate how patient he was being. My mother tried to stay out of his way. She apologized for everything even when she hadn't done anything wrong. She thanked him constantly for letting her stay. She bought groceries with her own money even though I told her not to. She did whatever she could to make herself small and invisible because she could feel Leonard's irritation every time she walked into a room. 2 weeks into her stay, we were having dinner. I had made pot roast because it was Leonard's favorite. My mother had helped me peel potatoes even though her knee hurt because she wanted to be useful. Leonard ate his food without saying thank you. He scrolled through his phone between bites. He acted like we weren't even there. Then his friend Barry called. Leonard answered at the dinner table because Leonard didn't believe in manners. Barry asked what Leonard was doing tonight. Leonard said he was stuck at home. Barry asked why. Leonard looked right at my mother and said, "When is the old hag going home?" He said it into the phone, but he made sure she could hear every word. He said his wife's mother was staying with them and she was driving him crazy. He said she was ancient and useless and smelled like old lady perfume. He said he couldn't wait for her to leave so his house could go back to normal. My mother set down her fork. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were wet. She excused herself quietly and went to the guest room where she had been sleeping for the past 2 weeks. I heard the door close softly. She didn't slam it. She didn't make a scene. She just disappeared because that's what my mother did when she was hurt. She made herself even smaller. I stared at Leonard while he continued his conversation with Barry. He laughed at something Barry said. He made plans to go out this weekend. He hung up and went back to eating like nothing had happened. He noticed me staring and asked what my problem was. I asked him if he really just called my mother an old hag. He shrugged. He said he was just venting. He said when we got married, he expected it to be just the two of us. I reminded him that I had asked permission before she came. He said he didn't realize she would stay so long. I said it had been 2 weeks. He said that was 2 weeks too many. I got up from the table and went to check on my mother. She was sitting on the bed crying silently the way she always cried. Without sound, without wanting to bother anyone. I sat next to her and held her hand. I apologized for Leonard. She said it wasn't my fault. She said maybe she should go home early. She said she could hire a nurse or something. She said she didn't want to cause problems in my marriage. I told her she wasn't going anywhere. I told her she was staying until her doctor said she was ready to be on her own. I told her Leonard could deal with it. She shook her head and said she didn't want me to fight with my husband over her. She said marriage was hard enough without adding family drama. She said she would call a car service in the morning. I told her absolutely not. I went back to the dining room where Leonard was finishing his pot roast. I told him my mother was staying until she was fully recovered. He said he didn't agree to that. I said I wasn't asking for his agreement. He said this was his house too. I said then maybe he should start acting like it was a home and not a prison for inconvenient guests. He said I was choosing my mother over him. I said he was making me choose. That night, I moved into the guest room with my mother. I told Leonard I would sleep there until she left. He said I was being ridiculous. I said I was being a daughter. My mother stayed for another month. Her recovery took longer than expected because of a small complication. Leonard complained every single day. He complained to me. He complained to Barry. He complained to anyone who would listen. He never apologized to my mother. He never took back what he said. He just waited for her to leave like she was a storm that needed to pass. When my mother finally went home, I helped her pack her bags. I drove her to her house and helped her get settled. I made sure she had everything she needed. Then I went back to my house and I packed my own bag. I threw my suitcase in the trunk and slammed it shut. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I got in the car and backed out of the driveway without looking at the house. I couldn't look at it. If I looked at it, I might change my mind and go back inside and pretend everything was fine. I drove toward the highway because I needed distance. I needed space between me and Leonard and that house where my mother had cried silently in the guest room. The extended stay hotel had a sign that said weekly rates available. I pulled into the parking lot and sat in my car for 10 minutes trying to breathe normally. A man walked past with his suitcase and gave me a weird look. I got out and grabbed my bag and went inside. The lobby smelled like cleaning products and old carpet. The woman at the front desk asked if I needed a room. I said yes. She asked for how long. I said a week to start. She ran my credit card and I watched the transaction go through. This was the first major money decision I had made alone in 5 years. Leonard always handled our finances. He said he was better with numbers. He said I signed the receipt and took the key card and found my room on the second floor. It was small and beige with a kitchenette and a bed that sagged in the middle. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. My phone started ringing. Leonard's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again 30 seconds later. I turned the sound off and watched it buzz against the nightstand. He called 17 times before midnight. I listened to the voicemails in order. The first one was confused. He asked where I went and why I left without telling him. The second one was annoyed. He said this was ridiculous and I needed to come home so we could talk. The third one was angry. He said I was acting crazy and making a huge deal out of nothing. The fourth one accused me of overreacting. He said he never meant to hurt anyone's feelings and I was being too sensitive. The fifth one said I was choosing my mother over my husband. The sixth one said I was destroying our marriage. The seventh one called me selfish. By the 10th voicemail, he was yelling. By the 15th, he was saying things I would never forget. Not once did he apologize for what he said to my mother. Not once did he acknowledge that calling her an old hag was wrong. Every message was about how I was hurting him, how I was being unreasonable, how I needed to stop this nonsense and come home. I deleted all of them and plugged my phone into charge. The next morning, I called my mother. She answered on the first ring and immediately asked if I was okay. She asked if Leonard was treating me well. I told her I left him. There was a long silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end. She said she was sorry this happened. She said she understood why I had to go. Her voice cracked when she said it. I told her I was staying at a hotel for now. She asked which one, and I told her. She said she could come get me. She said I could stay with her. I told her I needed to figure things out on my own first. She didn't argue. She just said okay, and that she loved me. I told her I loved her too. Then she started crying. She said this was all her fault. She said she caused problems in my marriage. She said she should have just gone home early like she wanted to. I told her firmly that Leonard's cruelty was not her fault. I said he chose to say those things. I said he chose to treat her that way. She said she raised me to honor my commitments. She said marriage was supposed to be forever. I reminded her that she also raised me to stand up for people I love. I said that included standing up for myself. She cried harder and said she just wanted me to be happy. I said I couldn't be happy with someone who treated her like that. We stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes. She told me about her knee and how it was feeling better. She told me her neighbor Verity had brought over soup. She told me small things that had nothing to do with Leonard or the divorce I was probably going to file. When we hung up, I felt better and worse at the same time. I called my boss next. I explained that I had a family emergency and needed to work from home for a few days. She asked if everything was okay. I said it would be. She told me to take the time I needed. She said my projects could wait and that family came first. I thanked her and promised to check my email regularly. She said not to worry about it and to focus on what I needed to focus on. Having that breathing room helped. I didn't have to explain to coworkers why I looked like I hadn't slept. I didn't have to pretend everything was fine while I figured out my next steps. I opened my laptop and tried to work but couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about Leonard and the house and whether I had made a huge mistake. Then I remembered his voicemails. I remembered him yelling about how I was destroying everything. I remembered that he still hadn't apologized. My resolve came back. 3 days passed. I worked from the hotel room and ordered takeout and tried to figure out what came next. On the third day, someone pounded on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Leonard standing in the hallway. My stomach dropped. He pounded again and yelled my name. He said we needed to talk like adults. He said I was being childish and he was tired of this game. I grabbed my phone and called the front desk. I told them my estranged husband was at my door and I needed security. The woman said someone would be right up. Leonard kept pounding. He said he knew I was in there. He said he checked the credit card statement and saw the hotel charge. He said I couldn't hide from him forever. 2 security guards appeared in the hallway. They asked Leonard to leave. He said he just wanted to talk to his wife. They said I had requested he be removed from the property. He started yelling that I was being dramatic. He said this whole thing was stupid. The guards escorted him toward the elevator while he shouted that I was making a mistake. I watched through the peephole until they were gone. Then I sat on the floor and shook for 15 minutes. I searched for divorce attorneys on my phone. I read reviews and looked at websites and finally picked one named Liam McIntyre. His office was downtown. I called and made an appointment for the next day. The receptionist asked what the consultation was regarding. I said divorce. She said the consultation fee was $300. I said that was fine even though it wasn't fine. I could barely afford it. But I needed to know what my options were. The next morning, I drove to his office. It was in a tall building with marble floors and expensive art on the walls. I took the elevator to the 7th floor and checked in with the receptionist. She gave me forms to fill out. I wrote down my name and Leonard's name and our address and how long we had been married. 5 years. It looked so short written down like that. Liam came out to get me after 20 minutes. He was younger than I expected. Maybe 40. He wore a nice suit and shook my hand firmly. His office had big windows that looked out over the city. He asked me to tell him what was going on. I explained about my mother and her surgery and Leonard's behavior. I told him about the phone call with Barry. I told him about leaving. He took notes and asked questions about our finances. He asked if we owned property together. I said we had a house. He asked whose name was on the mortgage. I said Leonard's. He asked about bank accounts. I said everything was joint. He asked if I worked. I said yes. He asked how much I made. I told him. He said Tennessee was an equitable distribution state. He explained that meant marital assets got divided fairly, even if they weren't in both names. He said I had rights to the house equity, even though the mortgage was only in Leonard's name. He said I had rights to retirement accounts and savings. I felt relief and fear at the same time. Liam said the consultation was just to discuss options. He said if I wanted to proceed, he would need a retainer. I asked how much. He said $2,000, but I could pay in installments. He was matter-of-fact about everything. He didn't act like my situation was dramatic or unusual. He just explained the process and what would happen next. It made me feel less like I was making an emotional mistake, and more like I was taking practical steps. I thanked him and said I needed to think about it. He said that was fine and to call when I was ready. I left his office feeling like this was really happening. I was really going to divorce Leonard. I realized I needed my own bank account. Everything we had was joint. Leonard could see every transaction. He could take all the money if he wanted to. I drove to a different bank than the one we used. I opened a checking account with $500 from my personal savings. The banker asked if I wanted checks. I said yes. She asked if I wanted a debit card. I said yes. She processed everything and gave me temporary checks and said my card would arrive in 7 to 10 days. I called my company's HR department and had my direct deposit changed to the new account. The woman on the phone said it would take effect with my next paycheck. I knew this would trigger a fight with Leonard. I knew he would notice when my paycheck didn't hit our joint account. But it was necessary. I couldn't leave myself vulnerable like that. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Leonard. He said I was sneaky. He said I was planning this for months. He said changing my direct deposit proved I was trying to steal from him. He called me names I had never heard him use before. He said I was going to regret this. I didn't respond. Liam had told me to document everything but minimize direct communication. I took screenshots of the texts and saved them in a folder. Then I muted Leonard's number so I wouldn't see his messages come through in real time. I could check them later when I was ready. I sat in my hotel room and looked at my new bank account on my phone. It had $500 in it. That was all the money I had that Leonard couldn't touch. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I went back to work on Monday because I needed the routine. I needed something normal. I sat at my desk and stared at spreadsheets and tried to focus on quarterly projections. My coworker Camila stopped by my cubicle around 11 and asked if I wanted to grab lunch. I said sure. We walked to the sandwich place down the street and ordered our usual. She got turkey on wheat. I got chicken salad. We sat at a corner table by the window. Camilla asked how my weekend was. I said it was fine. She looked at me for a long moment and said I seemed off. She said I looked tired. She asked if everything was okay. I felt my throat get tight. I set down my sandwich and told her I left Leonard. The words came out flat and simple like I was reporting the weather. Camila's eyes went wide. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. She asked what happened. I told her everything. I told her about my mother's surgery and Leonard's complaints and the phone call with Barry. I told her about the old hag comment and how my mother cried. I told her about packing my bag and the hotel and the lawyer and the bank account. Camila listened without interrupting. When I finished, she squeezed my hand harder and said she had been worried about me for a while. She said I always seemed tense when I mentioned Leonard. She said she noticed I chose my words carefully, like I was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I started crying right there in the sandwich shop. Not loud crying, but quiet tears that ran down my face while I tried to eat my chicken salad. Camila handed me napkins and told me I was doing the right thing. We walked back to the office and she hugged me in the parking lot before we went inside. Camila called me that evening while I was sitting in my hotel room watching television I wasn't actually watching. She said she had been thinking about me all afternoon. She said I shouldn't waste money on a hotel. She said she had a spare bedroom and I could stay with her as long as I needed. I thanked her but said no. I told her I needed space to process everything alone. I needed to sit with my thoughts without worrying about being polite or making conversation. She said she understood, but made me promise to call her if I needed anything. She said any hour. She said she meant it. I promised. After we hung up, I felt grateful to have a friend who cared, but also relieved she didn't push. I needed this time by myself. I spent the next week in that hotel room researching apartments. I sat on the scratchy bedspread with my laptop and scrolled through rental listings. Everything in my price range looked depressing. The cheap apartments had bars on the windows and reviews mentioning break-ins. The slightly less cheap apartments were tiny studios with kitchens smaller than closets. I realized how much I had relied on Leonard's income to maintain our lifestyle. Our house had 3 bedrooms and a yard and a 2-car garage. The apartments I could afford alone had 1 room and maybe parking if I was lucky. I made a spreadsheet of possibilities. I calculated what I could spend on rent and still afford food and gas and utilities. The numbers were tight. I felt scared looking at those numbers, but I also felt determined. I would make it work because going back to Leonard was not an option. My mother called on Thursday. Her voice sounded strange when I answered. She said Bethany had contacted her, Leonard's sister. Bethany had asked what happened between Leonard and me. My mother said she didn't know what to tell her. I felt anger rise in my chest, hot and sharp. Leonard was involving his family now. He was telling his version of events and making me look bad. I told my mother to just say it was between Leonard and me. I said don't give details. I said Bethany doesn't need to know anything. My mother agreed. She sounded worried. She asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. I wasn't fine, but I didn't want her to worry more than she already was. Bethany called me the next day. I saw her name on my phone and almost didn't answer. But Bethany had always been kind to me. She sent me birthday cards and remembered my favorite wine. I picked up. She said she heard Leonard and I were having problems. She said Leonard told her I left without explanation. She said she was worried about both of us. I could hear in her voice that Leonard had painted himself as confused and hurt. He had completely misrepresented what happened. I took a breath and gave Bethany a brief summary. I told her Leonard called my mother an old hag. I told her he complained about my mother constantly during her recovery from surgery. I told her he showed no respect for someone who was injured and vulnerable. There was a long pause. Then Bethany said that didn't sound like her brother. She said Leonard could be blunt, but he wasn't cruel. I realized right then that she was going to take his side no matter what I said. Blood was thicker than truth. I told her I had to go and hung up. Leonard's mother Judith left me a voicemail on Saturday. I didn't answer when she called because I knew what was coming. Her message said she heard we were having troubles. She said all marriages go through rough patches. She said I was probably being too sensitive. She said Leonard was under a lot of stress at work. She said these things happen and we just need to communicate better. I listened to the whole message sitting on my hotel bed. When it ended, I wanted to throw my phone across the room. I wanted to scream at her that her son was mean and selfish and showed his true character when he thought no one important was watching. But I didn't call her back. I deleted the voicemail and blocked her number. I found an apartment the following week. 1 bedroom in an older building on the east side of town. The building had been updated recently. New windows, fresh paint. The landlord was a woman in her 50s who showed me the unit herself. The apartment was small but clean. The kitchen had white cabinets and black countertops. The bathroom had a new shower. The bedroom was just big enough for a bed and dresser. The rent was $800 a month, which was the top of my budget. I would have to be careful about other expenses, but it was doable. The landlord ran my credit and called me 2 days later to say I was approved. I signed a 6-month lease sitting at her kitchen table. My hand shook while I wrote my signature. The lease felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. I had my own place. Leonard couldn't touch it. Moving day arrived 3 weeks after I left. I hired movers from a company I found online. 2 guys with a truck. I scheduled them for a Tuesday afternoon when Leonard would be at work. I gave them the address and met them at the house at 2 o'clock. I unlocked the front door and showed them what to take. My clothes from the closet, my books from the shelves, my laptop and personal papers, the small desk my father had given me before he died. I left behind the couch we bought together. I left the dining table and the television and the bed. Fighting over furniture seemed exhausting. I just wanted my things and to be done. The movers worked efficiently. They wrapped my desk in blankets and loaded boxes into their truck. I walked through each room making sure I had everything that mattered. Leonard's car pulled into the driveway at 3:15. I heard the engine and looked out the window. He got out and stood there staring at the moving truck. Then he walked up the driveway fast. The movers were carrying my desk out the front door. Leonard stopped in front of them and yelled that I was stealing from him. He said that desk was his. He said everything in this house was his. The movers looked uncomfortable but kept walking. They loaded the desk into the truck. I walked outside and stood on the porch. Leonard turned to me and started yelling louder. He said I had no right to take anything. He said he paid for this house. I stayed calm and told him these were my personal belongings. I said the desk was a gift from my father. I said my clothes and books belonged to me. Leonard's face was red. He said I was a thief. He said he would call the police. I told him to go ahead. I said the police would tell him the same thing I was telling him. These were my things, and I had every right to take them. The movers finished loading and asked if I was ready to go. I said yes. I got in my car and followed their truck to my new apartment while Leonard stood in the driveway watching us leave. The apartment felt wrong that first night. I unpacked my boxes and arranged my secondhand couch against the wall and hung my clothes in the small closet. The furniture looked sad and scattered in all that empty space. I had a couch and a bed and the desk my father gave me, and that was it. Everything else stayed at the house because I didn't want to fight Leonard over plates and lamps and the coffee maker we bought together. I sat on the couch around 9 o'clock and stared at the blank walls. My phone buzzed with another text from Leonard, but I didn't read it. I just sat there in the quiet apartment that smelled like paint and carpet cleaner. The life I thought I was building was gone. The man I thought Leonard was never existed. I cried sitting there alone on my cheap couch because even though leaving was the right choice, it still hurt. I grieved for the marriage I thought I had, and the future I thought we were making together. The next morning, I woke up in my new bed and checked my email. Leonard had sent a message at 2 in the morning. The subject line said we need to talk. I opened it and read 3 paragraphs about how we should try marriage counseling before I did anything drastic like filing for divorce. He said he was willing to work on our communication issues. He said every marriage had rough patches and ours could be fixed if we both tried. He said he loved me and wanted to save what we built together. I read it twice, looking for an apology about my mother. I looked for any acknowledgement that he said cruel things or treated her badly. There was nothing. Just vague mentions of communication issues and rough patches like the problem was abstract instead of his specific actions. He didn't say sorry. He didn't take back calling her an old hag. He just wanted me to come back and pretend it never happened. I called Liam that afternoon and told him about the email. He asked if I wanted to try counseling, and I said I didn't think it would help. He said it might look good in court that I attempted reconciliation before filing. He said judges like to see that people tried to work things out. I hated that advice, but I understood it. I emailed Leonard back and said I would do one session. Just one. He responded within 5 minutes saying he would find a counselor. We met at a therapist's office the following Tuesday. The counselor was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and glasses. She had us sit in separate chairs facing her, and she asked us each to describe what brought us there. Leonard went first. He said we had different expectations about boundaries with extended family. He said I prioritized my mother over our marriage. He said he felt disrespected in his own home. The counselor nodded and took notes. Then she asked me to share my perspective. I told her what Leonard said about my mother. I told her he called her an old hag while she was recovering from surgery. I told her he complained about everything she did and made her feel unwelcome. I told her he never apologized and acted like she was an inconvenience he had to tolerate. The counselor wrote things down and asked Leonard how he felt about that characterization. Leonard said I was exaggerating his frustration. He said he never meant to hurt anyone. He said he was just stressed about having a guest for so long. He said the words came out wrong, but his feelings were valid. I sat there listening to him rewrite what happened, and I felt my jaw tighten. That wasn't an apology. That wasn't acknowledgement. That was justification. The counselor suggested we needed to work on respectful communication and empathy. She said couples often struggled when they didn't validate each other's feelings. Leonard nodded like she was making sense. Then he spent the next 40 minutes explaining why his feelings were valid. He talked about how hard he worked and how he needed his home to be peaceful. He talked about how long my mother stayed and how he didn't sign up for that. He talked about his stress and his needs and his expectations. The counselor tried to redirect him a few times, but he kept circling back to his perspective. I barely spoke. I just watched him perform for the therapist, and I knew this was pointless. Counseling couldn't fix this because Leonard didn't think he did anything wrong. He thought the problem was my reaction to his behavior, not the behavior itself. I left that session knowing I was done. I called Liam the next day and told him to proceed with filing divorce papers. He said he would prepare a petition citing irreconcilable differences. He explained the retainer would cost $2,000 and I could pay in 4 installments. I wrote the first check for $500 sitting at my kitchen table. My hand shook while I signed it. That check felt like closing a door I could never reopen. It felt like making the divorce real instead of just threatened. I mailed it and felt sick and relieved at the same time. Leonard got served with the papers at work on a Thursday afternoon. I know because he called me screaming 15 minutes later. He said I humiliated him in front of his colleagues. He said the process server walked right into his office during a meeting. He said everyone saw and now everyone knew his wife was divorcing him. He yelled that I was vindictive and cruel and trying to destroy his reputation. I listened to him rage for maybe 30 seconds before I hung up. Then I blocked his number because I was done being yelled at for making decisions about my own life. My mother's neighbor Verity called me that Saturday. She said Leonard showed up at my mother's house that morning asking where I was. She said he pounded on the door and demanded my mother convince me to come home. My mother told him to leave. She said if he didn't get off her property, she would call the police. Verity watched from her window and said Leonard stood on the porch arguing for 10 minutes before he finally left. I felt proud of my mother for standing up to him. I also felt worried about her safety because Leonard was clearly escalating. I went to the courthouse on Monday and filed for a protective order. I listed the harassment at the hotel and my mother's house and his aggressive behavior during the moving. I described his pattern of showing up uninvited and making demands. The clerk gave me forms to fill out and scheduled a hearing. 3 days later, a judge granted a temporary order requiring Leonard to stay away from me and my mother pending a full hearing. The order said he couldn't contact us or come within 500 feet of either of our homes. I got the paperwork in the mail and felt like I could breathe a little easier. Liam called me 2 weeks later and said Leonard's attorney wanted to propose mediation. He explained this was standard and potentially faster than going to court. He said we could try to divide assets and settle the divorce without litigation. I asked if I would have to be in a room with Leonard and Liam said yes, but he would be there, and so would the mediator. I hated the idea of sitting across from Leonard again, but I agreed to try. I just wanted this over with. The mediation office was in a bland brick building downtown, with beige carpet and fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired. Liam met me in the parking lot and we walked in together. He carried his briefcase and wore a navy suit that made him look official and competent. I wore the same black dress pants and blouse I'd worn to court for the protective order because I didn't have many professional clothes. The receptionist directed us to a conference room on the second floor. Leonard was already there, sitting on one side of a long table with his attorney. His attorney was maybe 60 with silver hair slicked back and an expensive suit. He stood up when we entered and shook Liam's hand, but not mine. He introduced himself as Richard Caldwell and called me young lady when he said it was nice to meet me. I hated him immediately. Leonard wouldn't look at me. He stared at his phone and scrolled through something while we all sat down. The mediator arrived 5 minutes later. She was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She introduced herself as Jana and explained that mediation was voluntary and confidential. She said her job was to help us reach an agreement about dividing our marital assets. She said we could take breaks whenever we needed, and that she hoped we could resolve things today without going to court. Richard said they were prepared to negotiate in good faith. Liam said we were too. Jana asked us to start by listing our major assets. Liam pulled out a folder with all our financial documents. The house, both cars, our retirement accounts, the joint savings account that Leonard had already emptied, but we were pretending still existed, some furniture and household items. It didn't seem like much when you listed it out like that. 5 years of marriage reduced to a few lines on a legal pad. Jana asked about the house first since it was our biggest asset. Richard immediately said Leonard wanted to keep it. He said Leonard had paid the mortgage for the entire marriage and it wouldn't be fair to force him out of his home. Liam said I had contributed to household expenses and maintenance for 5 years. He said I had painted the kitchen and bathroom myself. He said I had paid for repairs when things broke. He said Tennessee law didn't care whose name was on the mortgage because the house was purchased during the marriage and was therefore marital property. Richard called me young lady again and asked if I had receipts for all these alleged contributions. Liam said we had bank statements showing regular deposits into the joint account that covered utilities, groceries, and household expenses. Jana made notes and asked Leonard if he disputed that I had contributed financially to the household. Leonard shrugged and said I had a job, so obviously I helped pay bills. Richard shot him a look that said, "Shut up." We argued about the house for almost 3 hours. Richard kept insisting Leonard should keep it because his income paid most of the mortgage. Liam kept pointing out that marriage was a partnership, and both spouses contributed in different ways. Jana suggested we get the house appraised so we knew exactly what we were dividing. She said once we had a number, we could discuss options like one person buying out the other or selling the house and splitting the proceeds. Leonard said he wasn't selling. He said he shouldn't have to move because I decided to leave. Richard put his hand on Leonard's arm to quiet him, but Leonard kept talking. He said I walked out on our marriage and now I wanted to take his house. Liam said it was our house and I had every legal right to my share. Jana called for a break. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. My reflection looked exhausted. When we came back, Jana asked if we could discuss the retirement accounts and vehicles. Richard said Leonard would keep his truck and his 401k. Liam said I would keep my car and my retirement account. Jana said that seemed fair and wrote it down. She asked about the savings account. Liam said Leonard had withdrawn $12,000 without my knowledge or consent. Richard said Leonard had every right to access joint funds. Liam said taking all the money before mediation was financial misconduct. Jana asked Leonard if he had withdrawn the savings. Leonard said it was his emergency fund and he needed it for legal fees. I wanted to scream. It was our emergency fund. Money we'd saved together for real emergencies. But Leonard spent it on a lawyer to fight me. Jana said she would note the withdrawal in her report and that it would be considered in the final settlement. Richard didn't look happy about that. We talked for another hour about furniture and household items, but I couldn't focus anymore. My head hurt and I felt sick. Finally, Jana said we'd made some progress, but we weren't going to reach a full agreement today. She said she would prepare a report for the court outlining what we'd discussed. She said we could schedule another mediation session or proceed with litigation. Richard said they would be in touch. Leonard stood up and left without saying anything to me. Liam and I walked back to the parking lot together. He asked if I was okay. I said I was tired. He said first mediations were always rough, and that we'd built a good record of Leonard being unreasonable. He said the judge would see that Leonard took all the savings and refused to negotiate fairly. I nodded, but I felt defeated. I drove to my mother's house because I needed to see her. She opened the door and took one look at my face and pulled me inside. She made tea and sat with me at her kitchen table while I told her about the mediation. She held my hand and said Leonard hadn't changed at all. She said some people couldn't admit when they were wrong. The next week, my mother had her follow-up appointment with the surgeon. I picked her up and drove her to the medical building. She seemed nervous in the car. She kept adjusting her seatbelt and looking out the window. I asked if she was okay. She said she was worried the surgeon would say her knee wasn't healing right. I told her it would be fine. We checked in and waited for 20 minutes before they called her back. The surgeon was a tall woman with short gray hair. She examined my mother's knee and asked her to walk across the room and back. My mother walked slowly but steadily. The surgeon said everything looked good. She said my mother could gradually increase her activity and start physical therapy if she wanted to strengthen the muscles around her knee. My mother smiled for the first time in days. On the drive home, she talked about maybe joining a water aerobics class at the community center. She said Verity had mentioned it and it sounded fun. I felt happy for her even though everything in my own life felt terrible. At least something was going right. 2 days later, I checked my bank account and saw that our joint savings was empty. I already knew Leonard had taken the money, but seeing the zero balance made it real. $12,000 gone. I called Liam and told him. He said this was exactly the kind of thing that would hurt Leonard in the final settlement, but that didn't help me right now. I needed money for Liam's fees and I didn't have it. I sat in my apartment staring at my laptop trying to figure out what to do. Finally, I called my mother. I hated asking her for money. She was on a fixed income from Social Security and my father's pension, but I didn't have anyone else to ask. She answered on the second ring. I explained about the savings account and Liam's fees. Before I could even finish asking, she said of course she would help. She said she had savings from my father's life insurance that she'd been keeping for emergencies. She said this qualified as an emergency. She said she could transfer $5,000 to my account tomorrow. I started crying. She told me not to cry. She said she was my mother, and this was what mothers did. She said she was proud of me for standing up for myself even when it was hard. I thanked her about 10 times before we hung up. The money appeared in my account the next morning. I paid Liam and felt grateful and guilty at the same time. Camilla texted me that afternoon asking if I wanted to come to her book club on Thursday. She said it would be a good distraction, and I didn't have to have read the book. I almost said no because I felt too drained to be social. But then I thought about sitting alone in my apartment all evening, and I said yes. Thursday night, I drove to Camilla's house. 6 women were already there sitting in her living room with wine and snacks. Camilla introduced me, and they all said hello and made room for me on the couch. They were talking about some mystery novel I hadn't read. One woman thought the ending was too predictable. Another woman loved the detective character. They laughed and argued in a friendly way. Nobody asked me about the divorce. Nobody looked at me with pity. For 2 hours, I just sat there eating cheese and crackers and listening to women talk about a book. It felt normal and good, and I forgot about Leonard and mediation and money. When I left, Camila walked me to my car and hugged me. She said I could come to book club anytime, even if I never read the books. 3 weeks after I filed for the protective order, the hearing happened. I had to go to the courthouse and testify. Liam met me outside, and we went through security together. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Leonard was already there with Richard. The judge was a black man in his 60s who looked like he'd heard every excuse in the world. He called our case and asked both sides to present their arguments. Liam went first. He described Leonard showing up at the hotel and my mother's house. He described the aggressive behavior during the moving. He described the pattern of harassment. Richard argued that I was being paranoid. He said Leonard was just trying to save his marriage. He said I was using the protective order to punish Leonard for normal behavior. The judge asked if I wanted to testify. I said yes. I walked to the witness stand and swore to tell the truth. Liam asked me to describe what happened at the hotel. I told the story about Leonard pounding on my door and security removing him. Richard cross-examined me. He asked if Leonard had threatened me. I said no, but his behavior scared me. He asked if Leonard had touched me. I said no. He asked if maybe I was overreacting because I felt guilty about leaving. I said no, I was reacting appropriately to someone who wouldn't respect boundaries. The judge asked Leonard if he had anything to say. Leonard stood up and said he loved his wife and just wanted to talk to her. He said he never meant to scare anyone. The judge looked tired. He said based on the pattern of behavior, he was extending the protective order for 6 months. He said Leonard needed to stay away from me and my mother and communicate only through attorneys. Richard looked annoyed. Leonard looked shocked. We left the courthouse and I felt like I could breathe easier. That afternoon, I got an email from Richard forwarded through Liam. Leonard was proposing he keep the house and give me $20,000 as my share of the equity. I called Liam and asked if that was fair. He laughed. He said the house had at least $80,000 in equity based on recent sales in our neighborhood. He said $20,000 was insulting. He said we should counter with $40,000 or force the sale. I told him to send the counter. I was done being reasonable with someone who took everything and offered scraps. I called my mother the next day to check on her. She sounded tired, and when I asked how she was sleeping, she went quiet for a moment before admitting she'd been having nightmares. She said Leonard showed up in them, pounding on her door and yelling. She said she woke up scared even though she knew it was just a dream. I felt terrible hearing that. My marriage problems were affecting her mental health, and she was already dealing with so much. I told her I was coming over, and she said she didn't want to be a burden. I said she wasn't, and hung up before she could argue. I drove to her house and brought a video doorbell I'd bought at the hardware store. I installed it on her front door while she watched from the living room window. Then I checked every lock in her house, testing the doors and windows to make sure they were secure. I showed her how to use the doorbell app on her phone so she could see who was outside before opening the door. She thanked me 3 times and apologized for being paranoid. I told her she wasn't paranoid and that feeling safe in her own home mattered. She hugged me before I left, and I could feel how much lighter she seemed knowing she had that extra layer of protection. Over the next week, 3 people from our old couples game night group reached out. First was Jessica, who sent a long text saying she'd heard about the divorce and was so sorry. She said she hoped Leonard and I could work things out because we seemed so good together. Then Mark called and left a voicemail saying Leonard had mentioned we were separated and that he seemed really torn up about it. Mark suggested maybe I should give Leonard another chance because everyone makes mistakes. Finally, Sarah emailed asking if I wanted to meet for coffee to talk about what happened. Her message ended with a comment about how Leonard was struggling, and maybe counseling could still help. I stared at my phone after reading Sarah's email and realized Leonard had been talking to everyone we knew. He was playing the victim, telling people he was heartbroken while leaving out what he'd said to my mother and how he'd treated her. None of these people had asked for my side of the story. They just assumed I was being unreasonable or impulsive. I felt angry and exhausted thinking about having to defend my decision to people who weren't there and didn't understand. I stopped responding to the messages. I deleted Jessica's text without answering. I didn't call Mark back. I left Sarah's email in my inbox and ignored it. Camila noticed I seemed distracted at work and asked what was wrong during our lunch break. I told her about the messages from mutual friends and how they all seemed to think I should reconsider. Camila shook her head and said this was completely normal during divorce. She said people pick sides and some people are more comfortable believing the version of events that makes them feel less awkward. She said I would find out who my real friends were through this process, and the ones who didn't bother asking for my perspective weren't worth keeping. Her words made me feel less alone, and I was grateful she understood without me having to explain everything. 2 days later, Liam called to say Leonard's attorney had sent a revised offer. They were now proposing $30,000 for my share of the house equity instead of the original $20,000. Liam said it was still low but closer to reasonable. He explained that if we rejected the offer and forced a sale, the process could take months and cost thousands in legal fees. He said the court costs, realtor commissions, and continued attorney fees might eat up the difference between $30,000 and what I might get from a sale. I asked him what he thought I should do. He said it depended on whether I wanted to fight on principle or move forward with my life. I thought about it for a long time after we hung up. I thought about how exhausted I was from fighting Leonard over everything. I thought about how much longer this could drag on if I pushed for more. I thought about my mother and her nightmares and how I just wanted this to be over, so we could both start healing. I called Liam back and told him to accept the $30,000 offer. He said he would draft a response and start working on the settlement agreement. The agreement would include splitting our retirement accounts and would confirm that we each kept our own vehicles and personal property. He said once Leonard signed, we could move forward with finalizing the divorce. I felt relieved and sad at the same time. Relieved that there was an end in sight. Sad that 5 years of marriage came down to haggling over money and dividing up retirement accounts like we were business partners dissolving a company. The settlement agreement arrived by email a week later. Liam walked me through each section over the phone, explaining what everything meant. I sat at my kitchen table with the document printed out in front of me, reading about the division of assets and the terms of our separation. I signed my name at the bottom and it felt strange and anticlimactic. I thought this moment would feel bigger somehow, more significant. Instead, it just felt sad and empty. I thought about the woman who married Leonard 5 years ago, standing in a white dress and promising forever. She had no idea what she was signing up for. She didn't know Leonard would show his true self when things got hard. She didn't know she would end up sitting alone in a small apartment signing papers that ended everything she thought she was building. My mother called that evening and invited me for dinner. She said she wanted to celebrate the settlement being done, and she'd made pot roast because it was my favorite. I drove to her house and found the table set with her good dishes. She'd even bought flowers for the centerpiece. We ate together and the pot roast tasted exactly like I remembered from childhood. She asked how I was feeling about everything, and I told her I was okay. Relieved mostly. She said she was proud of me for standing up for myself and for her. We talked about her plans to volunteer at the library now that her knee was better. She said she'd gone in last week to fill out the application, and they were excited to have her help with the children's reading program. It felt good to focus on her moving forward instead of just surviving. She seemed lighter somehow, more like herself than she had in months. The 60-day waiting period for the divorce to finalize started the day Leonard signed the settlement agreement. Liam explained that Tennessee required a waiting period before the divorce became official. 60 days felt endless when I thought about it, so I tried not to think about it. Instead, I focused on making my apartment feel more like home. I bought plants for the windowsill and hung art prints I'd found at a local shop. I spent a Saturday afternoon organizing my closet and arranging my books on the small bookshelf I'd assembled myself. I picked up small things at thrift stores and discount shops, slowly accumulating the items that made a space feel personal and lived in. Each addition made the apartment feel less temporary and more like a place I was choosing to be, rather than a place I was hiding. Leonard's check arrived on a Tuesday via certified mail. I had to sign for it, and my hands shook slightly as I opened the envelope. $30,000, written out in Leonard's careful handwriting on a cashier's check. I drove straight to the bank and deposited it, standing at the counter and watching the teller process the transaction. I felt like Leonard might somehow change his mind if I waited too long. Once the deposit was confirmed, I transferred money to my mother to pay her back for the loan she'd given me for Liam's fees. Then I put $10,000 in savings and looked at what was left. $20,000 to start over with. I went furniture shopping that weekend and bought a real bed frame instead of the metal one I'd been using. I bought a small dining table and 2 chairs. I bought a desk for the corner of my bedroom where I could work from home. Each purchase felt significant, like I was building something that belonged only to me. Camilla met me at the furniture store on Saturday to help me pick out a couch. We walked through the showroom testing different options, and she made me laugh by dramatically flopping onto each one and rating them on comfort. I finally chose a gray sectional that fit perfectly against my living room wall. Camilla said I had good taste and should trust my own judgment more. Her comment made me pause because I realized how much I'd deferred to Leonard's opinions during our marriage. He'd picked our couch, our kitchen table, even the color of our bedroom walls. I'd gone along with everything because it seemed easier than arguing, and because I thought that's what compromise looked like. But it wasn't compromise when only one person's preferences mattered. The furniture store loaded my new couch and table into their delivery truck, and Camila followed me home to be there when it arrived. We spent the afternoon arranging my apartment, and by the time she left, the space looked completely different. It looked like mine. The divorce papers came in the mail on a Tuesday afternoon while I was eating leftover pasta at my kitchen table. The envelope was thin and official looking with the county clerk's seal stamped in blue ink across the front. I held it for a minute before opening it because I knew what was inside, and once I read it, everything would be final. My hands shook a little as I pulled out the single sheet of paper that declared my marriage to Leonard officially dissolved. I read through the legal language about irreconcilable differences and equitable distribution of assets, and the date the decree became effective. That was it. 7 years together reduced to one page of typed words, and a judge's signature at the bottom. I wasn't married anymore. The life I had planned when I stood at the altar and promised forever was completely gone. I set the paper on the table and stared at it like it might change if I looked long enough. It didn't change. I picked up my phone and called my mother because she was the only person who would understand how I felt right now. She answered on the second ring and asked if everything was okay. I told her the divorce was final and the papers had just arrived. She was quiet for a moment before asking how I was feeling about it. I said I was sad but also relieved, which seemed like a strange combination, but it was true. She said that made perfect sense because endings are always complicated even when they're necessary. She said she was proud of me and asked if I wanted to come over for dinner. I told her I would come by this weekend and we talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. I felt better after talking to her. I put the divorce decree in a folder with all the other legal documents from the past few months and put the folder in my desk drawer where I wouldn't have to look at it every day. Work became the place where I could forget about everything else and just focus on tasks that had clear solutions. I started volunteering for extra projects that other people didn't want, because staying busy kept my mind from wandering to places I didn't want it to go. My boss noticed that I was taking on more responsibility and seemed more engaged in meetings. She pulled me aside one afternoon and said there might be a promotion opportunity coming up in the next quarter, and she wanted me to apply for it. The position would mean more money and a small team to manage, which felt overwhelming and exciting at the same time. I told her I was interested, and she said she would send me the details when the posting went live. Having something to work toward helped me feel like I was moving forward instead of just surviving. I went home that night and updated my resume for the first time in years. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Hudson, who had an office in a converted house near the community center. The waiting room had comfortable chairs and magazines that were actually current instead of 3 years old. Dr. Hudson was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and a calm way of asking questions that made me want to answer honestly. Our first session was mostly her asking about my background and what brought me to therapy. I told her about the divorce and how I was trying to understand how I ended up in a marriage where I was so unhappy for so long. She asked me to describe what my marriage was like, and I found myself talking about all the small ways Leonard made me feel like my needs didn't matter. She helped me see patterns of people-pleasing and conflict avoidance that made me ignore red flags about Leonard's character from the very beginning. She asked what I wanted to get out of therapy, and I said I wanted to understand myself better, so I didn't make the same mistakes again. She said that was a good goal, and we would work on it together. I left that first session feeling like maybe I could actually figure this out. My mother and I started having dinner together every week, alternating between her house and my apartment. She would cook one week and I would cook the next, and we would sit at the table and talk about our lives like we were friends, and not just mother and daughter. She was moving around much better now that her knee had fully healed, and she seemed happier than I had seen her since my father died. She laughed more and talked about things she wanted to do instead of just things she had to do. One night while we were eating the chicken stir-fry I had made, she told me she was thinking about taking a watercolor painting class at the senior center. I said that sounded great and asked what made her want to try painting. She said she used to paint when she was younger before she got married and had me, and she wanted to see if she still enjoyed it. Watching her plan things for herself made me realize that living the way you actually want to live matters more than just keeping up appearances and making other people comfortable. We finished dinner and did the dishes together, and I drove home feeling grateful that we had this time together. Verity called me one evening to tell me she had seen my mother at the community center and wanted me to know she was doing really well. She said my mother had been going to a grief support group on Thursday nights and seemed to be making friends with some of the other people there. I was glad to hear it because I had worried that my mother spent too much time alone after my father died. Verity said my mother seemed lighter somehow, like she wasn't carrying as much weight on her shoulders. I thanked Verity for calling and for being such a good neighbor to my mother. After we hung up, I thought about how Leonard's cruelty had hurt both of us, but in a strange way, it also freed us. My mother was building a life where she didn't have to make herself small and apologetic, and I was learning to trust my own judgment instead of deferring to someone else. Neither of us would have chosen this path, but we were both better for walking it. 6 months after I left Leonard, I got called into my boss's office, and she told me I got the promotion. The salary increase was significant enough that my budget went from tight to comfortable, and I wouldn't have to stress about every expense anymore. She said I had earned it through my hard work and dedication over the past few months, and she was excited to see what I would do in the new role. I thanked her and managed to keep my composure until I got back to my desk where I had to sit down because my hands were shaking. I called my mother right away and told her the news. She was so excited she actually squealed, which made me laugh. I asked if she wanted to go out to dinner to celebrate, and she said absolutely. That weekend, I took her to a nice Italian restaurant downtown, and we ordered wine and pasta and tiramisu for dessert. We raised our glasses and toasted to new beginnings and second chances, and I felt genuinely happy for the first time in longer than I could remember. I ran into Bethany at the grocery store on a Sunday afternoon while I was picking up ingredients for the dinner I was making for my mother that week. She was standing in the produce section looking at avocados, and I almost turned around to avoid her, but she looked up and saw me. She walked over and asked how I was doing in that careful way people use when they don't really want to know the answer. I told her I was doing well, and she nodded and said that was good to hear. Then she said Leonard was dating someone new already, which I assumed she mentioned to see how I would react. I felt a small pang of something, but it wasn't hurt or jealousy. It was more like relief that he had moved on and wouldn't be focused on me anymore. I told Bethany I hoped it worked out for him, and she looked surprised, like she expected me to be upset. We said goodbye, and I finished my shopping and drove home thinking about how much I had changed if hearing about Leonard dating someone didn't bother me the way it would have 6 months ago. My mother came over for dinner the following week, and while we were eating the roasted chicken and vegetables I had made, she told me she was proud of me. I asked her what for, and she said for choosing myself, and for showing her that it's never too late to expect better treatment from people. She said watching me stand up to Leonard helped her realize she had spent too many years making herself invisible to avoid conflict. She said my father had been a good man, but even with him she had learned to be quiet and agreeable, because that's what women of her generation were taught to do. She said she didn't want to live the rest of her life that way, and she was grateful I had given her the courage to change. I reached across the table and held her hand and told her I was grateful for her too. We sat there for a minute just holding hands across the dinner table, and I felt the kind of peace that comes from knowing you made the right choice, even when it was hard. I signed up for a pottery class at the community center because I wanted to try something new that was just for me and had nothing to do with my old life. The first class was on a Thursday evening, and I showed up nervous like I was starting school again. The instructor was a man in his 60s who introduced himself and explained the basics of working with clay. He showed us how to center the clay on the wheel and how to use our hands to shape it as it spun. My first attempt at making a bowl was terrible. The clay wobbled and collapsed and ended up looking like a lumpy pancake. The instructor came over and showed me how to adjust my hand position, and I tried again. The second attempt was slightly better, but still pretty bad. I looked at the misshapen blob on my wheel and started laughing at how awful it was. The woman next to me laughed too and said hers looked like a drunk turtle had made it. We both laughed harder, and the instructor smiled and said, "Everyone's first bowls look terrible, and that's part of the process." I cleaned up my workspace at the end of class and signed up for the next session, because even though my bowl was terrible, I had fun making it, and I wanted to come back and try again. I came home from the pottery class with dried clay under my fingernails and texted Camila about how terrible my bowl looked. She sent back 3 laughing emojis and asked if I wanted to grab coffee on Saturday to plan something fun. I said yes immediately because I needed more things to look forward to instead of just getting through each day. We met at the coffee shop near my apartment, and she pulled out her phone to show me pictures of Nashville. She said she had always wanted to go see live music there and asked if I would want to take a weekend trip with her next month. I stared at the photos of the honky-tonks and music venues and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Actual excitement about doing something just because I wanted to do it, not because it would keep Leonard happy or avoid a fight or make things easier for someone else. I told Camila I would love to go, and we spent an hour looking up hotels and making a list of places we wanted to visit. She found a small hotel within walking distance of Broadway, and I booked us a room for 2 nights using some of the divorce settlement money. Camila raised her coffee cup and said, "Here's to new adventures," and I clinked my cup against hers, feeling genuinely happy about the future for the first time since I left Leonard. A year after I packed my bag and walked out of that house, I'm sitting on my couch in my apartment looking at the framed photos on my bookshelf. There's one of my mother and me at her favorite restaurant, one of Camila and me in Nashville standing outside the Bluebird Cafe, one of my pottery class group holding up our finished bowls that actually look like bowls now. My mother calls every Sunday morning and we talk for an hour about everything and nothing. She joined a book club and started taking watercolor painting classes, and she sounds lighter when she talks, like she's not carrying around the weight of making everyone else comfortable. Camila is planning our next trip and keeps sending me links to places she thinks we should explore. I got promoted again at work, and my boss said I've become one of her most reliable team members. I'm learning to trust my own judgment about people and situations instead of second-guessing myself constantly. I still have bad days where I doubt whether leaving was the right choice, but then I remember how small I made myself in that marriage, and I know I could never go back to that. Life isn't perfect, and I still worry about money sometimes, and I still feel lonely on Friday nights when it seems like everyone else has plans, but everything in my life is honest now. I'm not pretending to be okay when I'm not. I'm not ignoring red flags to keep the peace. I'm not making myself invisible so someone else can be comfortable. This apartment feels like home because I chose everything in it. These friendships feel real because they're based on who I actually am. This life is mine, and I built it myself, and that matters more than I ever thought it would.